Okay, so this week is all about international trade. As you guys can see in this graph right here, trade as a percentage of the world's GDP has significantly increased over the last couple decades. Approximately 60% of the world's GDP, in other words, just the money generated, derived from some form of free trade. I think we're all learning, especially with coronavirus, just how integrated and how complex the world economy is. So, a lot of economists, in fact, over 90% of economists, say that generally free trade, the easier it is for us to buy, sell, and trade goods and commodities and services on the international market, the more economically prosperous we will be. However, I'm sure a lot of you guys already know that there are people in this country and people all over the world that think that it's better for countries to be self-sufficient rather than having to rely on China for our toilet paper supply or electronic production, so on and so forth. So that's what we're going to wrestle with this week. The question of, like, despite the fact that economists generally agree that free trade is good, why is it that so many people think that free trade is still disadvantageous? And that's what Coughlin is going to get at in his article for this week. That's what you're going to write your reading response on. First, though, I want to go over some basics like we always do, to make sure we're all on the same page. I want to talk about the difference between free trade and protectionism, because you may not have taken an economics course before, and so you're just not familiar with this terminology. So let me make this a little bit bigger here. When we talk about free trade versus protectionism, we're just talking about the policies that countries take up towards the movement of goods and services in and out of its borders. So there are a bunch of different ways that countries can move towards protectionism, in other words, making it more difficult for goods, commodities, and services to move in and out of its borders. Or there are ways in which countries can lessen trade barriers to make trade easier to conduct. So what you guys are probably most familiar with is this tool that we label tariffs. Tariffs are simply taxes on goods, commodities, and services. So we're going to use like an avocado example for all of these. If the United States wants to prevent people from being able to buy, sell, and trade avocados specifically between the US and Mexico, let's say, for some odd reason, we want to make it easier for avocado farmers in the US to sell avocados. And so we need to stop Mexican farmers from crossing the border with their avocados and selling it here in the United States. Well, the simplest thing that the United States can do is they can simply add a tax to avocados that come from Mexico. That would be a tariff. So we could say, you have to pay a 10% tax to the United States government for every avocado that you sell here in the US. That's going to make avocados more expensive in the US, and as a result, it'll be easier for farmers growing and selling in the US to sell their avocados to consumers here. That seems pretty straightforward. However, there are all of these non-tariff barriers that countries utilize because they're a little bit sneakier. Here's the thing. There are a lot of countries in the international system that act like they are proponents of free trade and promote free trade within international organizations and regimes like the World Trade Organization or the United Nations, so on and so forth. But they may still do things that are not as obvious in order to protect their industries at home and make it harder for companies or sellers to import goods and commodities into the United States. So these are what we call non-tariff barriers. The first thing that we could do to prevent Mexican farmers, again, from selling their avocados in the United States is we can impose an import quota. That means that we could say, hey, farmers, you can only bring 5 avocados across the border at once. Okay, notice this guy has way more than 5 avocados in his bins. That would make it really difficult for him to do business in the United States, and therefore then it would be easier for US avocado farmers to make a living. The second thing that countries can do to prevent free trade or make it less likely that companies or avocado farmers are going to sell their avocados in the United States is the United States could subsidize avocado production in the US. This means that we give a farmer in, let's see, there are a lot of avocados grown in San Diego County. So let's say we give farmers in San Diego County free avocado farming equipment. So we give them free seeds, and in addition to that, we pay for their equipment that they need. I have no idea what kind of equipment you need to avocado farm. We could give them access to water for free. You need a lot of water to grow avocados. So when the United States government gives farmers things for free that make it easier for them to produce that good or commodity, that's the United States government subsidizing farmers in the United States. And as a result, the avocado farmers in the US are going to be able to produce avocados for way cheaper than a farmer in Mexico who has to pay for water, pay for equipment himself. The third thing that the United States government can do, which is very similar to subsidies, is the United States government can implement protections of infant industries. Let's say we don't have a thriving avocado farming industry in the United States currently, but the United States government wants to make that happen. What they can do is they can actually give out loans at really low interest rates to avocado farmers. The United States government could even hold training sessions on how to grow avocados. And again, the United States government can subsidize a lot of the equipment, tools, and resources necessary to grow avocados. A lot of Asian countries, for instance, are really famous for protecting infant industries. And infant industry is just like a new emerging industry. Okay, so one of the reasons why Toyota, Nissan, Honda are so successful is because a lot of Asian countries gave out loans to these automotive companies a couple of decades ago. They forced consumers in those countries to only purchase those kinds of cars, right? Sometimes when you establish a business, it takes a long time to generate profit revenue and actually pay off all of the loans, the business loans that you had to take out to start that business. So protection of infant industries is the government kind of assisting with that process further. Another thing that countries can do is they can place really weird packaging requirements on a good or commodity, or they could come up with other silly stuff. So for instance, if we wanted to prevent Mexican farmers from selling avocados in the US, we could say, you can only sell avocados in the United States that are shaped like squares. Okay, yeah, so you can't really, I mean, there might be a way to make avocados square shaped, but as you can see from this picture, they're not, right? Or notice how the avocados are in a plastic bin. We could say you can only bring avocados into the United States that are in cardboard bins, right? Maybe avocados go bad faster if they're in cardboard, and so it's just stupid to try to transport them that way. That's what I mean by silly packaging requirements. We could also enforce some sort of environmental regulation or some health standard. So maybe there is a fertilizer that all avocados farmers use everywhere in the world. It's perfectly safe for people to consume avocados that grew in these conditions, so on and so forth. But the United States government could just kind of arbitrarily say, if you use this fertilizer, you can no longer sell avocados in the United States. Okay, so It's a little bit harder to identify the environmental regulations or packaging requirements or subsidies that are making it more difficult for trade transactions to go on. It's a lot easier to identify tariffs or taxes on goods and commodities. So, like I said, tariffs are out in the open. You're going to let other states know that you are not interested in engaging in free trade if you are using tariffs. But if you want to act like you're a proponent of free trade, but in fact protect an infant industry at home, then you may use a non-tariff barrier instead. Okay, so the more that countries put up tariffs and non-tariff barriers, the more protectionist they are. The less there are of tariffs and non-tariff barriers, the more liberal their trade policies are. Okay, if we slowly chip away at tariffs and non-tariff barriers here in the United States for the next decade or so, that is referred to as trade liberalization. Okay, so trade has become more free. Okay, so hopefully this will help you guys quite a bit with the Coughlin reading. Let me know if you have any questions.